You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, this is the update that we have been waiting for. It is now official. Donald Trump is a convicted felon in the aftermath of his sentencing in New York. I do want to read a response that Donald Trump just issued in the immediate aftermath of this conviction actually being handed down and made official. Quote, "For the sake and sanctity of the presidency, I will be appealing this case and am confident that justice will prevail. The pathetic, dying remnants of the witch hunts against me will not distract us as we unite and make America great again." So can I have your response, first of all, to his reaction to be immediately seeking an appeal to overturn this conviction?
His reaction is entirely expected and not at all fact-based. In fact, in responding to Donald Trump's incessant claim that it's always a witch hunt or a hoax or the product of angry Democrats or conflicted judges, none of which is true or supported by anything that resembles a fact, I want to do two things. One, I want to first quote the prosecutor, Joshua Steinglass. Brian, as part of the run-up to sentencing, every defendant is expected to sit down for an interview with a pre-sentence report writer, somebody from the probation department that prepares a detailed report and presents it to the judge so the judge has a complete picture of a defendant's background before the judge sentences that defendant. And here is what we learned in court today from the prosecutor. The prosecutor, Joshua Steinglass, said, quote, "The defendant, Trump, sees himself as above the law and won't accept responsibility for his actions." Mr. Steinglass said, quoting a pre-sentencing report that would normally carry significant importance, but Donald Trump refused to sit for an interview with the pre-sentence report writer. My second response, I'm going to quote Judge Merchan, the presiding judge in the case. He said a couple of things. One, the only lawful sentence, in his opinion, that does not encroach on the highest office in the land is one of an unconditional discharge. No imprisonment, no fine, no probation, no punishment. And then he said something that I think directly responds to Donald Trump's nonsense. He said, you know, the powers of the presidency are sweeping, but one power that the presidency does not possess is the power to erase a jury's guilty verdict. So I think, you know, those two individuals, the prosecutor and the judge, are actually speaking from a place that is based in fact and law and constitution.
Glenn, what do you make of Trump's claim that he's looking out for the sanctity of the presidency, that he's just seeking to protect the office from something bigger than himself? He's not doing this for him. He's just doing this for the office of the presidency. What do you make of that excuse that he put forward?
If he gave a rat's ass about the office of the presidency and the prestige it should enjoy, he never would have run for president the first time. He never would have tried to steal the election the second time when he lost, and he never would have run a third time. This is not about preserving the sanctity or prestige of the presidency. It's about preserving Donald Trump. So I completely dismiss out of hand that nonsense. Indeed, what became clear during today's sentencing when we were listening to the comments of the prosecution and the judge is that Judge Merchan wasn't really sentencing the offender. He really didn't say anything about how the crimes of conviction, 34 felony crimes designed to falsify business records, to cover up damaging information, hide it, secrete it from the voters of New York so he could steal, cheat in, and try to steal a presidential election. The punishment didn't fit the crime. The punishment actually fit the office that the criminal was about to enter. He talked a lot about the sanctity of the office and why it would encroach on the presidency if somebody, for example, had to serve a jail sentence or was on probation to the court. So this has nothing to do with the punishment fitting the crime. This has everything to do with the non-punishment sort of being an acknowledgement of the majesty of the office of the president, right, not the majesty of Donald Trump.
Glenn, you've dedicated your life, your life and your professional career to holding people like Donald Trump to account for their crimes. We are now at this point that we've been waiting for, where Donald Trump is officially a convicted felon. I got to ask, does this matter at this point that he now enjoys this label? And he'll try, again, to his earlier point, to appeal it to try to make it go away. So clearly it has some impact on his ego. But more broadly, this is a label that he was given without any punishment to accompany it. So from somebody like you, 30 years as a former federal prosecutor, do you view this as a success or a failure? Do you think that him being a convicted felon, although facing basically no accountability, that would come along with that label? Do you view this as a failure of the justice system, or some success because they have effectively or successfully labeled him a convicted felon, even though it doesn't come with any incarceration or really any punishment whatsoever?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's in the eye of the beholder, whether this is any kind of accountability, any kind of justice. I don't believe it is. I don't think it approaches accountability. I don't think it approaches justice. And I do think where the system fell down most directly is by letting Donald Trump delay his way out of accountability. That's the only reason he's not being sentenced, being punished, perhaps being incarcerated, is because he's holding up the shield of the presidency to avoid the accountability, the punishment that he so richly deserves. But on the flip side of the coin, Donald Trump is now officially and will forever be a convicted felon unless some appeals court reverses the conviction, which I think is unlikely. It also means Donald Trump really wouldn't be permitted to hold a government job if he applied for one. It means Donald Trump would never be issued a security clearance. I don't think he could even get the, code to the men's room at the Pentagon if he was visiting. And I think all of that is exactly right. Donald Trump is not trustworthy in any regard. Now, the fact that we will have a convicted felon heading up our federal government as the president of the United States for the next 4 years is horrific. I think other nations are rightfully laughing at us and mocking us for our choice to put a convicted felon, back in charge of the entire federal government. So I wouldn't call it accountability. I wouldn't call it justice. But the fact that his crimes have been documented, and the fact that even with all his power and influence and wealth and all of his connections as a former president, president-elect, and a future president, as Judge Merchan said, none of it can erase. It does not have the power to erase a jury's guilty verdict. If Donald Trump had been sentenced to 6 months in prison, right? Think about this. Steve Bannon went to prison for a number of months. Peter Navarro went to prison for a number of months. They did their time. They got out, and they're off kind of doing what they're doing now. So the prison term, the punishment that ordinarily accompanies a criminal conviction, is fleeting unless it's a life term. But what sticks is the fact that you are a convicted felon, and that all of the folks and the organizations that had to assemble to decide whether what you did qualified as felony crimes, prosecutors' offices and their staff, grand juries, trial juries, judges, and court staff, all of them decided when they assessed the evidence of what Donald Trump did, and Donald Trump had the full opportunity to make a defense in court, concluded Donald Trump committed these felony crimes, and he was adjudged guilty by a jury of his peers. He will forever be a convicted felon. And Brian, that ain't nothing.
Let's end with this. In the aftermath of what we've seen was a very successful effort by Trump, not just in this case, but across the judicial system more broadly, to delay any justice, and justice delayed is justice denied. Should there be reforms to the legal system, to the justice system, and will there be reforms to the justice system?
Oh, should there be? Yes. Everything from intake, the way prosecutors go about deciding to charge people, to re-entry when returning citizens after having completed a sentence return to the community. That's the front end, that's the back end, and everything in between, in my humble opinion, could use some reforming, because we don't do equal justice particularly well in this country. We, have one standard for the ruling class criminals and another standard for everybody else, the people without power and influence, without wealth, without voice, without connection. So yes, it needs to be reformed. Will it be? It depends on who we decide to elect in the future.
All right. Well, I think at least for the next 4 years, we're not going to see any reforms to the very systems that benefited Donald Trump the most. But of course, look, this ends or likely ends, depending on what happens with the appeal, a long chapter that we've been, reporting on for the better part of a couple of years now. So if we have any news as far as the appeals process goes, we'll make sure to bring it to you. Otherwise, if you'd like to stay on top of legal news with us, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.